Hello, I'm Chrissy Seaton and welcome back to my channel. We often ask ourselves this question, and the question is, why is everyone against Israel? What has been the impetus for this historically long struggle that Israel has with the rest of the nations? And why do they gather in opposition? That's the question on everyone's lips, I think. We might imagine we know why, but I think there's a lot more to it than meets the eye. So today I'm going to take a look into verse number 2. And so I'm going to explain some of the phrases and verses in Psalm number 2. Now, you all know that I use this text. I've mentioned it many times, and I will leave a link in the description box below there. And we will continue on now. So let's just start with the first verse, and it says, why do nations gather? This is verse 1. Why do they? That's the whole crux of the matter, isn't it? And it goes on here and it says, why don't Gog and Magog, who will attempt to wage war against the Jewish people and the Messiah, learn from the mistakes of their predecessors? Nimrod, Abimelech, Esav, Laban, Pharaoh, and it goes on. According to the Midrash, the question why of this verse refers to the nations and their plans to oppose and attack Israel. And it goes on and it goes on over history. If you look back and you know, you can read about this, and it continues on here and says that and regimes will talk in vain. So what does this mean? Well, it says that when the Philistines gathered to attack the newly crowned David, they spoke with excessive pride and confidence, for they had recently routed the Israelites' army and slain Saul and his sons. But their threats and boasts were hollow. So it says, against Hashem and against his anointed one. Well, the Philistines knew that David was chosen by God and anointed by Samuel. By attacking David, therefore, it is as if they are waging a war against God himself. Now, this can't be stressed enough. What is the background of the nations and the people that oppose Israel? What is their ethos? What is their character and morality and faith, etc.? We have to look at those things, and we have to ask questions that are uncomfortable. So let's continue on here. The Midrash comments that at any time when someone wages war with the Jews, it is as if they wage war against Hashem, meaning against God. And there are references to this in Numbers 31 verses 2 and 3 as well. Now it goes on, furthermore, since he is their protector, one who attacks the Jews will have to contend with Hashem, with God. So if you're going to attack the Jewish people or the Jewish nation in one form or another, then you actually will answer to God. Not to the other nations or the neighbours or the people you talk to. You will answer to God for this. And it's a serious matter. So let's continue on. In simple terms, it says here, the Midrash comments that at any time someone wages war with the Jews, remember he is their protector, and in simple terms it means they will plan to avoid serving Hashem. That's what it's about. They don't want to serve Hashem. And to prevent his anointed one's reign, meaning, they're talking of David here, but meaning Israel itself. So Ezra explains that this implies that they are entering this war, they counted their God-given common sense. So, there's a lot to be said for common sense, but there's also a lot to be said for what some people call their common sense. So let that just, stick in the mind. Now, verse number 3 goes on and says, let us cut their cords. The Philistines said that they would sever the bonds of the agreement that finally united all 12 tribes under David after the 7 years that he had reigned only over his tribe of Judah. So when there was that ingathering of all the tribes, David was activated as the leader of all of those. So it goes on and says, generally this refers to the bonds used to harness the oxen to the yoke. However, this describes the submission of Israel to the yoke of David's rule. So that's just so you won't be confused about what it's saying. Now, Rabbi Hirsch stresses that the yoke of God's anointed hangs heavily upon the necks of the non-Jewish nations also. Furthermore, the cord of the Messiah is the moral self-discipline that he teaches, thus saddling man with duties. These limitations are repugnant to the nations of the world, who yearn to free their consciousness from any inhibitions. Now, take a deep breath there, because that is pretty much how it is, isn't it? It doesn't need any further explaining. Now, let us cut their cords and let us cast off their ropes from ourselves. Now, this goes on and suggests that the cords of those that bind and prevent wrongdoings, while ropes are parts of the yoke that force action, such as fulfilling positive commandments, the nations sought to liberate themselves from both. So in other words, we don't need to go. No, we're not going down that track. We're going to rule ourselves. Now, verse 4 goes on and says that this verse responds to the question posed in the verse above. Why do sinners succeed? Indeed, it appears as if the non-Jews are successful with their litigious lifestyles. Such questions are only asked by one whose vision is limited to the short term, and God, however, sees the entire past, present, and future with one sweeping view. To him, it is wrong to see the nations as successful, since their guilt accumulates until one day they will be demolished. So while you might think you're getting away with things, but eventually it will come back and hit you in the face. How far can you go yourself before you realise, oh no, enough's enough, I don't think I'm on the right track here. I don't think this is right. So it's issuing a challenge to us all, isn't it, really? Now it goes on and says, he who sits in heaven will laugh. Now in the nations, if the nations attempt to combat God, how futile and comical is their vain threat. For he is in heaven. In any conflict, the adversary on higher ground has the advantage. Even if he is weak, how much more so if he is strong like God, or strength from God. So, if you're following God's rules and you have the strength of God on your side, and you might only be few, as in that tiny little country of Israel. I don't know how many of you listening to my videos have been there, but I've visited Israel 3 times. And once you get there and you see what's going on, you think, wow, there's more to this than just grabbing this piece of land. Now, it says here, goes on. Oh, I hope I haven't lost my place here. Okay, he who sits in heaven will laugh. If the nations attempt to combat God, how futile and comical is their vain threat. Because, Hashem is in the heavens, and it doesn't matter how great or strong you think you are, or the opposing army thinks it is. It's kidding itself when it's against God, fighting against God. Now, it goes on here and says that the humour will be in the fact that the nations seek to escape their responsibilities and restraints of mitzvahs, meaning good deeds and commandments, which for one who has experienced them are actually quite pleasurable. So, we know that the mitzvahs we keep, they give us joy and understanding, and they give us comfort. They guide us. So let's go on to verse 5 now. It says, when he will speak to them in his anger. Now, this follows, Malbim says, suddenly, when their cup of faults will be filled, Hashem will react with due retribution. Now, let's go on now and take a look at verse 6, which says, I will read it, I myself have anointed my king over Zion, my holy mountain. So this means I myself have anointed my king. Now Hashem will chastise the nations. How dare you attempt to remove David after I have chosen and anointed him? Furthermore, rather than undermining David's authority, your rebellion will reinforce his power. For now I, Hashem, am forced to openly display my choice of David by destroying his adversaries. So this is all still alluding to Israel, isn't it? Now, verse number 7 goes on, I am obligated to proclaim that Hashem said to me, you are my son, I have begotten you this day. All right, let's take a look. I am obligated to proclaim. Now, David now responds, it is my definite obligation and a very pleasant and acceptable one to proclaim the following. And it goes on, Hashem said to me through his prophets, Nathan, Gad and Samuel. So we're getting into, just make sure I haven't missed it. Yes. You are my son. You are the leader of Israel, who are called my son, my firstborn. And there's a reference to this in Exodus chapter 4, verse 22. Because Israel depends on you. Now, David, you are called my son. He who tries to resemble God in all of his ways and deeds is considered to be his son. Now, I have begotten you this day, on the day when I crowned you as king over my children. It is as if I have begotten you and you have become particularly precious to me. No doubt, no doubt. Precious to me in the merit of Israel. Now, Radak adds that on the day that David was chosen as king, he was endowed with a godly spirit, that inspired him to say psalms, and it was considered as if Hashem had begotten him. Now we go on, and according to the Zohar, however, the spiritual maturity that is referred to here took place after his 13th birthday, when he made bar mitzvah. That's just a little clarifying part there. Midrash applies this verse to the Messiah. 1/3 of history's tribulations will occur during his generation. And when the time comes for him to reign, Hashem says, I will create him anew, and the years of suffering will be forgotten. Now, this is a very important thing. I'm just going to read a couple of lines again. 1/3 of history's tribulations, meaning troubles and anxieties, will occur during his generation, and when the time comes for him to reign, Hashem says, I will create him anew, and the years of suffering will be forgotten. We've only got to read a history book to see the absolute disgraceful things that have happened to the Jews over the years. We know. And so, in other words, some of these disasters and things people look at as that we're closer to getting to see the Messiah, and you can't help but think that, really. You think, well, how you see and hear about them, you think, how much worse can it get? Surely the Messiah must be due soon. Now, verse 8 reads, ask of me, and I will make nations your inheritance, and the ends of the earth your possessions. Now, what does it say about that? Well, because you are like a son, and a father customarily bequeaths his possessions to his children, you need only to ask, and I will give you the nation as your inheritance. Now, Rashi says that the term for supplication and prayer, that is, pray to me whenever you go out to fight your enemies. Now, it goes on and says, because the world and its inhabitants all belong to Hashem, he has the right to bequeath them to his son, just as a father, a flesh and blood father can do that. Now, this promise was fulfilled to David, for the surrounding nations were subject to his rule. Now, according to the Rabbi Hirsch, the inheritance and possessions are a spiritual conquest in which the nations will adopt the morality and unity that are the mission of the kingdom of David. So we're getting a glimpse that the things we'll do a turnaround. It will happen. It will happen. God willing, it be in our time. Now, verse 9 proceeds and says that you will smash them with an iron rod. You will shatter them like a potter's vessel. Well, it goes on and explains this now. God also said to me that any nations who challenge me will be smashed with an iron rod, that is the sword, or signifying death and destruction. Now, you will shatter them like a potter's vessel, meaning the analogy is to the earthenware, which shatters into fine fragments. Now, if any of you have done pottery or have a pottery vessel or something, and something happens to it, you'll know what I'm talking about. It just shatters and you think, oh. Now, we're going into verse 10 now. And verse 10 says, and now, O kings, be wise, be disciplined, judges of the earth. Now, David says, now that your nations see that I have the power to do with you as I please, be wise enough to prevent tragedy, lest I exercise my strength against you. In other words, you see what I can do, be warned. Goes on and says, phrase, O kings, be wise. Now, the prophets of Israel are merciful, and they warn the heathens to desist from evil. For God stretches out his hand to both the righteous and the wicked and offers them salvation. So because you're wicked, the offer of salvation is still there. Be disciplined, judges of the earth. Now the kings here refer back to the kings of the earth in verse 2. And the judges corresponded to this with princes who conspire of that verse, meaning, there's people out there that are conspiring, and they're certainly not princes in the terms that we think of them. David's exhortation to be wise commands their call to gather up. In other words, they gather up against Hashem. Meaning the people gathering against Hashem, as in opposed to us gathering for Hashem. In response to their declared resolve to cut their restraining bonds, he calls upon them to be disciplined. So if you think you're your own master, you're not. Be disciplined, i.e. submit to. Now, self-discipline and moral law. You judges of the earth who desire to put earthly affairs in order must first put yourself in order by acknowledging Hashem's absolute truth as the one law that stands supreme above all others. This harks back to an old saying that says, get your own house in order before you start telling others how to run their household. Wise words, wise words. Now, coming into verse 11 now, we are serve Hashem with awe, that you may rejoice when there is trembling. All right, let's take a look at this. Serve Hashem with awe. Make your desires to do only that which God desires. Now, that you may rejoice when there is trembling. Now, the translation follows Rashi, who understands the later part of the verse to be the reward for serving him with awe, reverence, respect. Then you will rejoice when others are gripped by trembling, as if it is written, trembling seized the hypocrites. Isaiah chapter 33 verse 14. Some see this phrase as a paradox because they mistakenly assume that joy and fear are contradictory emotions. In truth, however, they may coincide, and this is very interesting. True joy is a sense of contentment when a level of growth or perfection has been attained, and we've all experienced that at some times in our life. Thus, if one properly fears Hashem, he may exult over having chosen the proper object of his fear. The Talmud understands the phrase as a directive to instill fear even into the moment of joy. Too much joy leads to frivolity, even involvement in the joy of a mitzvah, such as the Torah study or prayer, should be tempered by a sense of seriousness and awe. Now, that's a bit of a mouthful to get your head around, but another way of putting it is certainly you need to enjoy gaining knowledge and getting further insight into things, and you want to do it. It's a joyful thing to do, but it's not to be taken to a frivolous point of view, and where you get to the point where you think, oh, I've know it all now. Oh, I'm so pleased. I'm an authority on that now. Well, you know what? We'll never get to that stage. But what we need to do is understand what we as Noahides need to do in our daily life, not go wondering and agonising over other faiths and branches of different philosophies, etc. just concentrate on what Hashem wants you to do as a child of Noah, as a Gentile, and do it well, and don't get too cocky about how good you are, because lest you trip and you fall on your face. It can happen. Now we're coming to verse 12 now, the final verse. Yearn for purity, lest he grow wrathful and your way be doomed, for in brief moment his anger will blaze praises for all those who trust him. So in other words, just when you think everything's going good and you put the foot wrong, bang, the ceiling caves in on you. So yearn for purity. David offers a final word of advice to the nations on how to accustom themselves to loving that which is good. Yearn. Now this word, this translation leads to is purity. It refers to purity of the unsullied heart. You know, some people have a hard heart, cold heart, but this is the unsullied heart we're talking about. Alternatively, Rashi interprets stimulate, i.e. stir and arouse yourself to acquire purity of heart. So, you know, I need to work on this. I need to make sure my heart is pure in my thoughts and my words and my deeds. It goes on, lest he grow wrathful. If you do not mend your ways swiftly, Hashem will destroy you in his wrath. So it's no good to saying I'm going to fix myself up in a week. Oh, next week. After I've finished this, I'm going to try and make myself a bit better. Do it. Start now. Now, it goes on and says, for in a brief moment his anger will blaze praises for those who trust in him. A human king is sometimes in a positive mood and sometimes he's angry. But he cannot maintain two contradictory emotions simultaneously. And you can't. You can't. You're either happy or you're sad or you're in between. You can't be all three at once. Hashem, however, can at the very same moment be furious at the idolaters and favourable towards Israel. So that is a closing statement that gives us comfort, doesn't it? Israel is foremost in Hashem's heart at all times. He knows better than we do what's going on there. He knows what has to be done to fix it. But at the same time, we should take it upon ourselves to improve ourselves as well. And understand, just as all the bad things are happening to Israel, so too that we could be enduring that in one form or another as well. So we do need to be careful what we say, what we do, even who we mix with. You know, there are certain people that it does your soul good to be with. You come home feeling, oh, I'm so enjoyed that, you know, because they've passed on little wisdom pearls to you and showed you a different angle on something else through conversation, and you think, oh, I'm so much better for having been in that person's company. I've learnt much. I think I've got I'm improving in my thoughts and understanding, and that's good. They're the people you need to cling to, as opposed to the people that are supposedly the in-group or whatever, where you know if you're truthful to yourself that that person is not on a righteous pathway in line with God's commandments. As a Noahide, I'm talking about here, but for that matter, for all of the world, all of inhabitants. You know in your own heart that they're not a good influence, that they're not mirroring the 7 Noahide laws. They're not a mirror of that walk in life. And so all those things we have to make decisions about. Do I or don't I continue this, you know, friendship or this relationship or whatever? It can even be in school. There are some schools that parents take their children out of and homeschool now. Now, not because one individual has done something wrong, but more to the fact that their child isn't being exposed to the sort of things that a righteous Gentile should be. They've taken away the morning prayers and things like that. So we're seeing an increase in this happening all over the world, homeschooling. And I think it got, its credibility was really noted when COVID was on, when parents had to keep their children home from school. So, if there was any good to come out of COVID, there is something. Parents discovered they could achieve more with their children in a short space of time than perhaps their children had done previously in a whole term. So it's about attitude. Unless your attitude is right and you're honest about what you know and observe, that's what lets you down at times. You've got to be on the ball, so to speak, not only with everyday life, but certainly with how you behave, because Hashem's watching all the time. Thank you always for listening, and thank you for the nice emails and comments I get at times. And I really want you to please take care. God bless.